श्रीला गुरुदेव की जय, श्रीमान महाप्रभु की जय, श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय, श्री द्वादशी की जय, गौर भक्त वृंद की जय, गौर प्रेमानंद हरि बोल। So, good morning to all of you, at least from here in Costa Rica, from Madhuban. Good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever you may be there. Thank you very much for your association and presence. And today we are continuing with our series of lectures on Sadachar, Maryad, Vaisnava, the Etiquette, Vaisnava Decorum, discussing the role of rules and love in the life of sadhaka, or the role of rules in the loving project that is sadhaka, that the life of a sadhaka constitutes. So, well, today our second meeting, let's make as usual some brief review, brief summary of what we were speaking about in our previous lecture, the first one, which was an introduction to the whole series and an introduction to the concept, the very concept of what is Vaishnava etiquette. And as you know, we began by mainly declaring or clarifying what Vaishnava etiquette was not. That's an important way of indirectly speaking about what something is. Well, of course, we make this point very clear that we will find rules, but these rules are there to promote a feeling, to promote an emotion. That's part of life. In an immature stage in life, we are ruled by emotions, but mundane emotionality. A certain stage there will come the use of our intellect and some rules for tame those emotions and give them shape in another type of project, a spiritual project, and eventually, of course, we will be thrown into the realm of bhava, transcendental emotions. So we could divide somehow or other the project in those three stages: mundane emotions, not that much of those emotions, but not that much of bhava as well, but mainly you are harmonizing head and heart, and eventually all that done in the proper way, we will be welcomed into that realm of ecstatic feelings. So we again mentioned that Vaishnava etiquette could be termed in Sanskrit like sadachar, proper behavior, or honest, decorum, honest behavior, way of conduct, Maryad, how to do things in a most proper way at every moment. And when I say proper, we refer to those things which are anukul for Krishna Bhakti, which are favorable and give pleasure to Hari, Guru, Vaishnavas. And this Vaishnava etiquette has a lot to do or everything to do with relationships, how to relate with everything, with everyone, and with everything. We divided these two possibilities: how to properly relate with people, all types of people, but especially sacred people, saintly people, sadhus, and how to relate not only with sacred people, but with sacred objects, sacred paraphernalia. So all this falls into also the realm of Sambandha, or Oriental conceptual orientation of how to properly conceive everything in connection to its source. And all in the context, again, of a favorable offering of ourselves through whatever we do, anukul, pleasing details. We emphasize that point, no? Sometimes we speak about principle and details, but here we will speak about details not as something secondary or relative, but as something crucial that will make the difference. So Vaishnava etiquette, we will see, is not about getting neurotic with details, but getting absorbed in details, knowing how we can make a difference into our offering by investing all ourselves in those so-called details that will create the whole difference, if you will, in a favorable way. So also we mentioned how we are to incorporate these details or these advices that we will find in the Vaishnava etiquette as a gradual process, but all this has the intention and potential to become a whole lifestyle, whole part of our identity, the ultimate identity. In the beginning, it may come to our lives in the form of some scars, some impressions. Eventually, those put together will create habits, and eventually they will manifest a whole identity, which goes hand by hand with the concept of lifestyle. So Vaishnava etiquette has to do with building our Vaishnava project, our Vaishnava identity, with all these loving details. So we quoted a very nice verse when Mahaprabhu spoke with Sanatana Goswami, who is known as the Acharya of Achar, or the Maryad Acharya in our Gaudiya Sampradaya. Mahaprabhu himself instructed him in that regard, empowered him in that regard to write about it. And of course, Mahaprabhu himself shared this verse that we quoted when he mentioned how Maryad is part of he says, Tatapi Bhakta Shrabab Maryada Rakshan, the nature of the Bhakta, of the devotees, he will protect Maryad, he will maintain, he will take care, nourish Vaishnava etiquette, and that will eventually become Sadhura Bhushan, the ornament of the sadhu. That would enhances the beauty in one's saintly behavior. That's called Maryada or Vaishnava etiquette. And of course, Mahaprabhu himself gave a very powerful example of this through his own example, Krishna's Anacharya Lila. We especially emphasize the third verse of Sikshastakam, which has a lot to do with how to practice, how to conduct ourselves in our daily life, in our chanting, which should go hand by hand with our daily life. As my Guru Maharaj will say, your sitting should nourish your walking, and vice versa. And we also mentioned how we are not experiencing the full details or the full potential of bhakti because of aparad, very, very probably. So how to avoid aparad in our practice, this third verse of Sikshastakam has a lot to do with that. And that's a very summarized, encapsulated way of speaking about Maryada or Vaishnava etiquette, and the codes of behavior, the rules, decorum for the devotee. And we ended our last class also mentioning the concept of niyamagraha, how we should be careful of not indulging in it when embracing Vaishnava etiquette. We should not, niyamagraha has twofold meaning, concept given by Rupa Goswami, which means to reject all rules and regulations in a whimsical way, not follow anything at all, or to follow even every single rule externally, but without a feeling, without an understanding at least of why I'm doing this. Why should I be doing this? So just do it mechanically. So that may take to vinashyati, says Rupa Goswami. That may create harm in our devotional project. So again, the idea is the rules should invoke love. So they are to be followed in a certain way, and we should at least understand in theory all these long list of rules and advices are not there to limit me, but to, on the contrary, allow me to expand all my potential and become the best available version of myself. And we are practitioners of Raga Bhakti, although some Vaidhi Bhakti may be there in the beginning in the form of Ajata Ruchi Raga Bhakti, but mainly Raga Bhakti, which means to follow in the footsteps of the Brajavasis, and of course, naturally, that will extend to follow in the footsteps of Sri Guru, who is a Brajavasi. So he's residing in that place, in that state of consciousness. So Vaishnava etiquette and Raganuga Bhakti has not to do with performing vows and taking and following rules, but you love someone and you will follow that person you love, and whatever that person is doing or what he likes or dislikes or she likes or dislikes, we will align with that. So in this, those will be our rules. Anukulyas sankalpa pratikulyas varjanam. So ideally, this Vaishnava etiquette has to do with this. We will follow, because there are so many rules and so many things that so many people say, but we have our sadhus, we have the persons who have captured our heart, and we will follow in their wake, in their mood, and the details will be adapted according to their taste, which has to do with a particular expression of the absolute coming to us. So that's a brief summary of what we explained during our previous lecture, introductory one. And I mentioned that today we will start speaking about our relation with Guru and sadhus and so on. But in between that, some points came and some dialogues, some discussions online, and some exchanges of messages came that make me to think about speaking about something else before, if, with your permission, of course. And of course, we may continue with that next class. Hopefully, let's see, who knows at this point. But I would like to share some words, and my Guru Maharaj said something yesterday about the idea of Vaisnava etiquette, of course, but also in connection to the idea of Vedic culture. So, what's the role of Vedic culture? Because some of the things that we may see as part of the Vaishnava etiquette may be uh, construed or misconstrued that part of the particular culture, Vedic culture, someone may say Indian culture. So, how to separate what's cultural relative issues and what's the role of Vedic culture and how that what's eternal, what's impermanent in all that, and so on. So I think it's important to speak a little bit about that to begin with, and we will speak in further in other classes as well about aspects of this point, like dress and so on. So I'm mentioning this because I do not plan to address every single detail today about Vedic culture and things like that, but I consider it important to share some ideas to know how to properly embrace Vaishnava etiquette. So again, some since we spoke about Mahaprabhu, just in my summary of previous class, he's the one who established Raganuga Bhakti. He came to preach Raganuga Bhakti in the world. Raga Marga Bhakti Loke Korite Pracharan, says Chaitanya Charitamrita. Mahaprabhu came to give Raga Bhakti to the world. And again, someone may misconstrue the idea of Raga Nuga Bhakti like no rules. Vaidhi Bhakti has to do with rules, Raga Bhakti has to do with no rules at all. But the point is that we find that Mahaprabhu himself, he gave Raga Bhakti to the world. And he, of course, experienced a unique way of that, if you will. Um, he followed the rules of Vaishnava etiquette very strictly, especially if we speak about himself as a sannyasi, Sri Krishna Chaitanya. In certain in every single thing he was doing, he was exemplary, as you may know. I won't enter into the detail of all the many leelas and how Mahaprabhu followed that strictly, but just mentioning a brief of those cases, we have, for example, the famous case of Chotta Haridas. He was just a young renunciant, and he was begging rice from an old lady, Madhavi Devi, and someone else asked him to do that. He was not begging for himself. And Mahaprabhu heard about he doing that, interacting with a woman, with a lady on some level or another, and he banned Chota Haridas from his association, very strictly speaking. But again, he wanted to make a point about how sannyasis to behave according to the codes of that order, or how Mahaprabhu reacted to Prataparudra Maharaj, for example. You know, he was the king of Puri, and he had desire to see Mahaprabhu. No? When Mahaprabhu went to Puri, Prataparudra Maharaj was not there. Mahaprabhu converted Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and the whole city, and then left for his South Indian journey. And then Prataparudra Maharaj came to Puri and found the whole city converted to Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So he was wondering, what's this? He wanted to meet Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu returned after like 2 years. And when he returned, he denied the audience to the king because he said the king is the personification of mundane existence, position, fame, power. I am a sannyasi, have nothing to do with him, and so on. So he followed, of course, eventually he gave the darshan to Prataparudra Maharaj, but he had to observe, that's the point, certain considerations according to Desha Kala Patra. He was Krishna, he's Acharya Lila. So, of course, again, we are not living nowadays, most of us, of all of us, basically, especially in Western countries, in a society that even may have glimpses of Vedic society. And we know, of course, that the Gaudiya Vedanta conception transcends the Varna ashram, which sometimes Vedic culture is so much connected to. But also, I wanted to share one point that I think it's important to at least contemplate and allow on some part of our prospect, which is we should understand that we are at present not living in the Vedic culture. We are not inhabiting traditional Vedic culture. There is no Varna ashram system. Those sensibilities are not in our DNA, contemporary DNA, but also in our practice, we are projecting ourselves eternally to the Nitya Lila, both in Braj and in Navadvip, Golok Vrindavan, Nitya Navadvip. And interestingly, the Lila expresses itself, plays itself out in the context, in the socio-cultural context of Varna ashram, of Vedic culture, if you will. So there is a place for it not to be rejected absolutely in every single level by us. And to understand some of those advices or rules, not necessarily as something totally relative. So I will try to speak a little bit about this, no? Because for us as Gaudias, the concept of Vedic, I will say, it's mainly connected to what we may call Arya, sometimes in English called Aryan, the Aryan race or so on. But of course, Arya means someone who has high knowledge of higher values in life, higher truth. And that's connected for us to the time Krishna appeared, what it meant, and especially to the, let's say, renaissance that Mahaprabhu brought into the world in the light of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which my Guru Maharaj will term as the New Testament of the Vedic revelation. So all that is Vedic for us as Gaudias, no? in that particular line. But also the idea of Vedic, something being Vedic, is more connected to the Vedas, of course, the four Vedas. And the Vedas, the main emphasis found in the four Vedas is Karma Kanda, as you know. Traigunya Vishaya Vedanis Traigunya Bhavarjuna, says Krishna to Arjuna. You have to transcend that because Karma Kanda laid emphasis on the gunas and fruitive activities. And Varna ashram in the context of Karma Kanda. So in that sense, we generally do not consider ourselves as Vedic, or we do not present ourselves at least as 100% Vedic, but as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, as followers of Uttam Bhakti, as Srila Rupa Goswami presents itself, such a concept, and so on. I'm mentioning this because, again, when we speak about Vaishnava etiquette, some of these things will appear in the way. So the classical question will be there, no? Why? So the point is, I want to be a devotee of Krishna. So why do I have to subscribe to Vedic sensibilities or Indian customs? So that's an important point. Sometimes the idea of Vedic and Indian becomes converged, and that's not necessarily the case. Because one may say Bhakti is not external, it's not dependent on anything external. It's a matter of internal mood, if you will, intention, bhava. And Krishna is only pleased with one's bhava and nothing else. We know bhava grahi janardana. Krishna is only taking the essence of one's offering. But it's important to understand certain features if someone comes with such a purva paksha, such a argument, if you will. Sorry. So we could say that when we speak about Krishna, let's say the absolute reality, that has mainly, we may speak in terms of two expressions of the absolute, personal and impersonal. Generic, specific. Use the term you like, but mostly those. So for example, yogis, jnanis, they will strive for impersonal, mostly realization. They do not have a personal relationship with the absolute. So they do not need to follow any specific culture in which they will live after liberation. You follow my point? If you want Brahma Sayuja, there's no cultural sensibilities there. There's no one there. There's no culture, no sensibilities, no people, no sense of individuality. So you won't have to be concerned about how it will be there in that sense. But in the case of devotees, bhaktas, we follow the path of not an impersonal, abstract sense of divinity, but very specific, personal one. For example, we have even with Paramatma, what to speak of Brahman, even with Paramatma, Srila Jiva Goswami makes this distinction in his Paramatma Sandarbha. He mentions, between Paramatma and Bhagavan, there is a big difference. Of course, we are speaking about the same absolute, Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaniti, Sabdyate, but Paramatma, as we know, is in everyone's heart, is ruling over Maya Shakti, Tatastha Shakti, is Antaryami, is non-discriminatory, is impartial, is equal to all, controller, regulator of the universe. No? That's his role, the one who is monitoring one's karma and so on. That's Paramatma. But we have Bhagavan on the other side, who is a pretty specific and personal God, only interacting with his Sarup Shakti. And he's discriminating between devotees and non-devotees. He had the likes and dislikes. He has a culture in which he expresses his lila. Krishna makes this difference when he speaks in the Gita. He says, Samoham sarvabhutisu namme dvesistinapriya jibayantit mam bhaktya maitatte suchapyam. The first two lines, Paramatma is speaking. I'm equal to all. I am not in favor or against anyone. And then he said, but those who render bhakti to me, I feel especially inclined towards them. So the very first lines speak Paramatma, then Bhagavan shows divine partiality, if you will. So my point is that Paramatma is impartial, still is some form of generic expression of divinity, while Bhagavan is pretty specific. And I'm not speaking yet about Braja Krishna, because Bhagavan entails so many forms of the personal Godhead. So what to speak of Braja Krishna in Vrindavan, as we will see. So Bhagavan entails a specific personal form of God, specific likes and dislikes, some of which are cultural, if you will, arise in the context of the Brajavasi culture, if you will. So we cannot apply the principles of Paramatma to Bhagavan. Again, Paramatma is universal, has no preferences. Bhagavan does have them. So, and going back to the idea of bhakti as anukul, as we spoke the other class, no? Bhakti means I want to do those things that are pleasing to the object of my affection. And that's seva, anukul seva. So, and it's important to understand Krishna has some likes, again, has some dislikes. And of course, this is not just a matter of course. Krishna likes to use some whatever clothes. I put that clothes and I immediately engage in Anukul Seva. I'm not saying that point. No, you cannot just attain Bhagavan by wearing a specific dress or adopting particular aspects of Indian culture, Vedic culture. But it's important to understand this point. If we speak about devotion, bhakti mark, there are two. We may speak also in terms of two types of devotees. One who want to have a very specific relationship with Bhagavan, and those who are not so inclined to do so. As we know, some of them may want to be in Vaikuntha, reside in the same planet as Narayan, meditate on him, but they are not so interested in a specific thing. But there are those like us who want to have a very specific relation with a very specific form of the divine, such as Krishna in Vrindavan. And we should get acquainted to which is his mood, who is he there at home, if you will, his behavior, his likes, dislikes, so we can align ourselves in order to render proper anukul seva, favorable services. So again, Krishna has some partiality, has for his devotees, likes, dislikes. He has an abhiman, a sense of identity. He identifies himself as a gopa, as a cowherd boy. That's his ego in Braj, his identity. He's not identified there as a creator God, as you know, as the source of everything, universal administration. He's not maintaining the cosmos. His mind in Braj is very focused in the Brajavasis. Basically, he's not thinking about anything beyond that. Vishwanath makes that point in Raghavarman Chandrika. And in the context of that, he reciprocates in terms of, as I said, Vedic culture, which is in one sense the norm, in the social norm, in the lila. So that's an interesting point. Again, even though we may be living in a postmodern world and in a particular culture, at least in terms of our eternal projection, there is place for those sensibilities. So one famous example in this connection is when, for example, these Yajnik Brahmins, which were executing sacrifice, and some friends of Krishna went to them to ask for some prasad because they were hungry, and these Brahmins were not even answering them. They was totally absorbed in a ritualistic, mechanistical way in following their rituals, and they were not able to reply. No, it is said that when you say Swaha Jagnabai Vishnu, the fire of sacrifice is the mouth of Vishnu, and Vishnu himself came to them in the form of his friends, if you will, saying, "I'm hungry, feed me." But they were not able to connect, no, the essence of the ritual with the form of the ritual they were performing with the essence that came personified to them. But the point is that eventually the wives of those Brahmins came and approached Krishna with food, and they surrendered to Krishna. Interestingly, they say, "To hell with our husbands, now we surrender to you." But the point is, at that point, Krishna did not accept these Brahmin ladies in the same way as he accepted the cowherd girls in Vrindavan, the gopis. Why? Well, one explanation could be because according to Vedic culture, or we may call traditional Indian culture, if you will, not the present day modern Indian culture, but traditional Indian culture, if you want to make a synonym with Vedic, according to such culture, a cowherd man, a gopa, cannot have any type of conjugal relationship with a Brahmin girl, a Brahmin woman. No, according to such cultural sensibilities, that's not a proper fit. A Brahmin lady, a cowherd boy. And Krishna didn't follow that. And that's why, as Gaudiya Vaishnava, those who want to have a Madhurya, a conjugal relationship of service with Krishna, they are not aspiring to be born as Brahmin ladies in Braj, but as gopis, as cowherd girls. So the point is, again, try to get the point. Krishna has the ego of a cowherd boy in Braj. He's that identity. Outside of Braj, he has another egos. He has another names. He is another type of Krishna. Mathuresh Krishna, Dwarakesh Krishna. But in Braj, he has that particular ego, and we should gradually try to understand that and identify with that. And the point is, we should learn to identify with that here in our sadhaka deha, in our practice of sadhana. It's not that we will just be thrown there to Golok and there I have to try to digest that idea. We will reach there by properly dealing with this type of concepts. So we are again practicing Raganuga Bhakti. Raganuga has to do with very specific. We could call Raganuga Bhakti the path of a specific relationship. It's very specific. So the service is done, of course, as Rupa Goswami says, Seva Sadhaka Rupena, Siddha Rupena Chatrahe. Famous verse that describes main angas of Raga Bhakti. You serve Krishna with your physical body, your sadhaka deha, and with your aspired, mentally conceived spiritual body, Siddha Deha, Siddha Rupa. And for engaging in such seva, you have to learn gradually which are the customs, cultural sensibilities there. Of course, if you do your service in your spiritual, internally, mentally conceived form at some point of your practice, of course, not necessarily from day one, there you won't have any social restriction because all will be done in meditation. But to do seva in the physical body, of course, there may be some social restrictions. Again, we are not living in we may not even live in a society or family which is supportive of bhakti. That may happen. So one, of course, needs to make the necessary adjustments in those cases. But also, one should keep in mind what's the goal and which is the nature of the goal we are pointing. So again, which is the goal for us as Gaudiya Vaishnavas? We want to be with Krishna in Braj. We want to be with Mahaprabhu in Nadia. So it's important for us to understand him, Gaur Krishna, the same person, as a person, as we are persons and we want to be understood as such, and we want to, to be allowed to express our individuality in a healthy way, which will have certain tastes, certain likes, dislikes, certain affinities, and so on. Of course, one thing is to have that in the conditioned platform, another thing is to express that in a fully liberated stage, and that's what we are speaking here. the Absolute himself, has a personality, has a particular inclination towards this and that. There is a particular setting. So again, there are details, and they are to be adjusted if you understand the principle. So the principle is this: our goal is that lila. That lila is characterized by certain sensibilities that we are to get acquainted with gradually if we are to enter there. Because if we do not get such a principle, entonces, then what will happen is that we won't be able to properly advance into that direction. And of course, as the argument said before, the most important thing in bhakti is bhava, the emotion, the feeling. But as we know, that's something that most of us do not have yet. As my Guru Maharaj will say, it's not just about putting a t-shirt that may say, be in the bhav. Yes, you have to be in the bhav, but by putting the t-shirt, that's not enough udipana, enough stimulant. So bhava is the goal to achieve, as we know. Nitya siddhasya bhavasya, sadyata prakyatyam hridi sadyata. The goal of sadhana, as my Guru Maharaj said yesterday, is bhava. And the goal of bhava is prem, if you will. So, yeah, the most important thing is bhavas, but we don't have bhava. So how to tame bhava means how to conduct ourselves in sadhana in that way. So we may say by following Vaisnava etiquette, we will see different details regarding, for example, deity worship, or even certain advice regarding taking prasad, or how to receive guests, or different forms of worship. We may say all those rules are external to bhava, but actually, if properly understood and followed, they will be assistant to our reaching bhava. And that's the whole idea of this series of lectures. We will share different rules and recommendations in the context of they being helpful in our attaining bhava. And again, for some of us, following some of these rules will be easier than others, and we shouldn't go mad with that, but we should try to follow as much as we can by understanding properly what's the meaning of them, what's the purpose of them, how they will be favorable for our service to Guru and Vaishnavas if we don't have bhav. So imagine if you have bhav, which means you have love, basically. If someone has bhav, the point is you will naturally do whatever is pleasing to Krishna. I mean, your whole constitution will be drenched in that idea. So if you have bhav, how much you will be open to do that, whatever may be pleasing to Krishna. You will really live only for that. So if we don't have bhav, at least we have trying our best in that direction. So when I say, of course, that Krishna Sri Krishna lives in a particular culture setting, and that's present in terms of Vedic culture. I'm not saying Indian culture. So that's a different thing, because sometimes we converge these 2 points and we think, what's Indian actually? Because so many influences are there. But the point is, Krishna is not Indian. I mean, we are speaking about God, although Krishna is something concept beyond God. And as we know, it's aprakrita. It seems mundane. It seems full circle. We are going back here because God is free from all designation and partiality, and Krishna is full of them, but in a transcendental way in the context of Leela. So Krishna, as I say, it's not Indian, and he's not following modern Indian culture, and that's a very different thing, but also he's not Western. So we have to be careful in both extremes. But he lives in the Leela, again, according to Vedic culture and customs. Those sensibilities are there in the Leela. So if we want to live with him, we need to know this culture. Again, that may be not a must and the greatest emphasis for every devotee now, but at least we should have that present in some part of our mind, heart, as essential part of our prospect. Because I want to live with Krishna. There is a culture. He's in a specific form of the absolute, the ultimate one for us. So I want to know that culture, those sensibilities, and follow them as much as possible, even in our modern settings, so I may get trained gradually to enter into that realm. It's not that I do not care about that at all, and suddenly I'm thrown into Golok Vrindavan and I know how to deal with all of those things in detail. again, if we cannot follow some of those things because of our social situation, some whatever specific case, no problem. I mean, again, this is not to feel discouraged at all, but at least we should be aware of it. That exists, that has a role. There's a way of all those things being favorable. So we should be aware of it and we are respectful to it, not dismiss those things. But again, this doesn't mean to follow modern Indian culture. Nowadays, there are so many Indians who do not follow Vedic culture at all, and they are not our ideals. Now, Krishna Lila doesn't mean Bollywood or whatever other thing. An important point also to mention in this direction is when Krishna appeared in this world, we say, okay, but he was born in India, so Krishna was Indian, but he appeared on a part of the planet Earth that now is called India. It was not called India at that time. So sometimes we may engage in this historical presentism. From the present, we analyze the past, but we do not travel in time to see the details of that time. So at that time, the earth was not divided actually into so many countries as we know of today. Even in modern times, we know how in our own life so many countries changed and their names. So what to speak thousands of years ago. For example, in India, some 65 years ago, Pakistan was part of India. 65 years ago, not now. Or 45 years ago, also Bangladesh was part of Pakistan. But now there are different countries: Pakistan, Bangladesh, India. So now people from Pakistan and Bangladesh, they will not accept that Krishna was born in their country, if you will, which was India, let's quote unquote India. No? They will consider Indian culture as foreign to them, but their forefathers are not thinking like that. So we should be a little bit more flexible. Even as you may know, when the earth was created, quote unquote, in the uninterrupted cycles of creation and destruction, as you may say, as you may see in the map, the land mass was one unit. Now, when you see the shape of the different continents separated, if you try to join them, they perfectly fit with one another. So it is said that in time they got separated, if you will. No, so the earth divided into different parts, different continents, different countries, different societies. But again, and we may say, well, Krishna was born into Indian culture, but that's not true. That was not India at that time. According to the Puranas, the whole earth was not known as India, but was known as Bharat Barsha, as you know, Bharat Bhumi, which is the official name for India. But again, whatever we may think of Indian, that's a point also. Some of the things that we may think of Indian actually were common to all cultures of the world at that time. Because again, there was much more unity in that sense. For example, in Greece, in Egypt, Israel, different cultural sensibilities common to all those places. Of course, again, thousands of years ago, those countries didn't have the name. But all these cultures have, for example, simple dress, like some cloths wrapped around their body, and things like this. I won't speak about clothes in detail today. That's a whole separate chapter. But the point again, and sorry if I'm pounding too much the post, but I think it's important to get this clear, that we need to become aware on one level or another according to our specific stage about the necessity of at least being aware, respecting, not deriding these cultural sensibilities that are part of the lila, ultimately, and in practice see how much one can uh, incorporate those in one's life, so one is gradually preparing one's consciousness and develop one's sense of identity in the lila in that direction. For example, in the Raga Varma Chandrika, maybe you remember uh, in our previous series, we studied that book. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also describes in the last part of the book, second part, seventh prose, in order to enter Krishna's pastimes in Golok Vrindavan, the Raganuga Sadhaka has to enter into the womb of the gopi when on earth, on Bhoma Vrindavan. Krishna is manifesting the lila there. He will enter there, and from day one in birth, he will receive bhakti samskars and will become acquainted with the cultural sensibilities of the Raj. And because he said, without taking such a birth, why can one cannot get proper acquaintance with Krishna's human-like pastimes. So that expression has to do with all the details that include society, social issues, cultural issues. Because again, the point is, ideally, you have to be born in a particular social structure with certain customs that make the lila. The lila again is very specific. And Krishna behaves, as I said, according to the ideals of traditional Vedic culture. So ideally, we have to learn this if we are interested in a relationship with Krishna in Lila, with Gaur in Lila, Mahaprabhu in Nadia, the similar thing. So again, this is a very specific path, and gradually as much as we can, we should be very clear about our goal, because the goal is so specific that, of course, if something is very specific, gradually we should have very clear in our mind which are the details of such a specific goal. So this is a very specific path, a very specific goal, and we should gradually become acquainted of all that. And that practice that will take us towards that goal, of course, has to be done here. Now we cannot like bypass it. And of course, with this, I'm not implying this is a different thing that those that say you have to be born as Indian in order to obtain salvation or all this nonsense. I'm not saying that. Try to separate one thing from the other. So these points have to do with the idea of Vaisnava etiquette, because again, some of us may feel some of those points merely cultural, relative, coming only from India. So, and we may reject them, or I mean, we could say, let's say, and we have there was some discussion these days on one forum, in one Facebook group. My Guru Maharaj was also present there and was invited to be there. Some interesting points came there. But we could say that the Vaishnava etiquette, which again includes many details of Vedic culture, could be followed, let's say, in three levels, if you want to call it Kanishta, Madhyam, Uttam, for terming them in some neophyte, intermediate, and superlative way. So in the first level of following, all these details will be the classical niyama graha that I described last class. Now, you just accept all the things and you become fundamentalist and fanatical. I have to wear a dhoti, I have to have the tila, I have to shave my head, I have to eat with this hand, and I have to look in this way, I have to. But you don't have an idea why. You are just doing very literally, in a very literal way, copy paste without proper understanding. So you are following the etiquette, Vaishnava etiquette, all the advice, but again, externally. So that's the neophyte level. Intermediate level will be like, as my Guru Maharaj will say, interpretative level. So you may say, okay, there are all these advices, but also we have Indian culture, Vedic culture. We are not following Vedic culture, we follow Gaudiya Vedanta. So we concentrate on the essence and we try to separate details from principles, but still we are not so focused about the ultimacy of Lila and the necessity of those details yet. We are mainly now concerned about not being fanatical, not being niyama graha like. So we may say, okay, there are cultural details, and we are in the different culture. We have to adapt our psychology, DNA in the present situation, not to be dysfunctional. And there's a place for that. Of course, I'm not against that at all. And because Krishna says in the Gita, it's not so easy to modify your nature, your acquired nature, your psyche, your DNA in this particular lifetime. So basically try to connect that, imbibe that with bhakti. So there's a place for that, but there's the higher consideration, if you will, is what we have been sharing, is all those so-called relative cultural details are part of the lila in the context of raga bhakti. As raga bhaktas, we understand all such so-called relativity are crucial details in the ongoing dynamics of lila. So we start to pay attention to them again, but from a different side, not as a neophyte did, just making like following blindly, if you will, but understanding, okay, yes, Krishna is not Indian, but Krishna is not following Indian culture. He's not Western as well. He follows Varna Ashram in the context of the Lila. Krishna himself eternally established that. He says that in the Gita, Chatur Varnyam Mayashristam Guna Karma Vivagas, etc. So from that side, we can also embrace some of those or all of those principles, whether we speak about Vaisnava etiquette or whatever. Let me share one nice quote that my Guru Maharaj shared, I think, 2 days ago in the context of this online discussion, in this connection. And he spoke about a little bit about that yesterday for the ones who were in his Q&A, Sunday Q&A session. So basically he said, Gaudiya Vaishnavism is both broad and deep. He's speaking here about Mahaprabhu's dispensation. It has two sides, the breadth and the depth. So concerned with what to wear, no? In this context, he's speaking about clothes, but we can extend to everything we were speaking about. Concerned with what to wear in the here and now with regard to personal comfort and also to attracting others pertains to the tradition's breadth. Concerned with the poetic descriptions of the dress of Krishna and his associates with the spiritual desire to enter his lila pertains to its depth. So again, we will speak about clothing later in other talks, but I think this is an important consideration to have, not to overemphasize one thing nor the other, because we may, of course, pound on the post, it is necessary for lila, that will help you, but again, who is ready for lila and who is ready to even start to contemplate that on that level? So many may not be ready for that, but at least we should respect that and know at some point those details will be important. Maybe nowadays, first of all, I need to accommodate myself in other terms, but it's not that I will dismiss those things altogether. So it's important again to say what I mentioned. No? When we say traditional Vedic culture, it's not nowadays Indian culture. That's not Vedic culture. That's Vedic culture, but mixed with unending strands of other cultures, Muslim invaders, British invaders, and so many other things. No? So we should separate. No, sometimes my Guru Maharaj shared that idea. No, like when Prabhupada in India was doing like this, and the devotees said, okay, that's a spiritual way of saying yes, and Prabhupada is a spiritual person, so he's saying that. And eventually they went to India and they realized everyone is doing that. So also, even if some detail is part of a culture, it doesn't mean that we have to overextend that, over glorify, if you will, that expression to a level that is not necessarily proper in my stage. So I think that a great problem nowadays in this connection, because there are many devotees who oppose to this idea strongly, who really feel we have nothing to do with India, we have nothing to do with anything that may resemble that, and they dismiss that altogether and not give just a places even in the prospect of eternity. So again, the problem can be in great part that begins at least with in the Western mind or the modern mind when Vedic culture is labeled as Indian. That's a very crucial point, because that makes Vedic culture that looks as part of a history, which belongs to some region called India and so on. But as we have tried to explain, Vedic culture, strictly speaking, is created, invoked by Bhagavan himself, is eternal, it exists forever in the Leela, and manifests in this world in certain places, and of course in time may become diluted and so on. And on the other side, we are here, us, in a modern civilization, modern culture in the West especially, but also in India. India has more West than many other countries. And we are identified with that, as I mentioned. We have not transcended the upadhis or the designations that came as a result of being born in the Western culture, which eventually are to be transcended properly. And when I say transcended, I'm not saying, again, rejecting, but integrated into higher synthesis, as I always mention. Because that's a very important point. We are Western born, most of us at least, but we were met. We didn't find, but it found us bhakti philosophy that speaks about the soul and the super soul and what's beyond even the super soul, the super soul, Bhagavan. But some of us may have not yet fully resolved our, I don't know, gender issues or emotional issues on a more basic level. Many devotees still like getting divorced more than non-devotees sometimes, or they might not always, of course. But my point is, sometimes we may have a very high theology, and that can be very dangerous because we may, without realizing that even, like rest on that, become lazy in paying attention to other more relative details that we need to solve as humans or as Westerns or as whatever you may like, in order to be able to fully take advantage of the high theology of Gaudiya Vedanta and the cultural sensibilities of the Lila. That's a high thing. No? And we may speak about that, but we need to walk the talk, as we say. So we are trying to practice bhakti with all that it implies, but we also need to work on these other cultural details, not only the cultural ones in the Lila, but the cultural ones in this Shrishti Lila we are in yet. You know? So we should know how to understand everything and adapt everything according to our person condition. In the Bhagavatam, there is one expression in this connection. In first canto, when Bhishma appears there in the 9th chapter. So in the 9th verse of this chapter, Bhishma is called Deshakala Vibhagavit. Deshakala Vibhagavit, which means he's a knower of Desha Kala. And Vibhaga. Vibhaga means differences. And Desha Kala, Desha means place, Kala means time. Another way of saying Desha Kala Patra, but here he's speaking about someone who knows the differences, according to where you were born, in which time of the history, so many differences are there. So Bhishma was Desha Kala Vibhagavit. Similarly, in the Bhagavatam, in 4th canto, that term is used again, 8th chapter, Desha Kala Vibhagavit. When Narad Muni is encouraging Dhruva Maharaj, to be a knower of the differences in place and time in his service to Krishna. So we should develop those attributes. And this applies, of course, it starts to extend to many other things. Sometimes with the idea of Vedic culture also comes the role of the ladies, of the woman. Now, of course, we may speak about that. But sometimes we may read, for example, women are less intelligent. No? Someone has said that here and there or whatever. Even if you read that, the point is you should know time, place, and circumstance because there is a place for that. In which sense? In which relative sense? If, for example, a woman, if I say women are less intelligent in a society where women are not educated, that may be true. You follow? But the same statement will not be true in a society where women are educated. So sometimes those things happened. No, sometimes scripture may say something 5,000 years ago, and now it's a totally different sense. And we should know which was the time, which was the circumstance, why it was said. But it has nothing to do with being against this or that. So, and the word tradition here is also important. We follow a tradition. We say we follow the Gaudiya tradition. Tradition entails the conception of something like ancient, but not necessarily that means that is like stopped in time. Especially if we speak about Gaudiya Vedanta, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, we are speaking about a very alive tradition, dynamic, progressive, ongoing tradition. All this connected to the principle of revelation, an ongoing affair, parampara. It's like a dialogue that is evolving till nowadays. That's the nature of the Bhagavad, as my Guru Maharaj would say. We have Chaitanya Bhagavad, Srimad Bhagavatam. There's one empty page for you to feel that with your own Bhagavad chapter story, with your own life of service. That's the concept of the Bhagavad Parampara. And all this should be applied according, yes, to time, place, circumstance that we are now. So regarding Vaisnava etiquette, of course, there may be some relative adjustments to some relative details, but there is no change in the absolute foundation of the motivation behind those details. So again, we are not, when I'm saying all this, I'm not just promoting Vedic culture and we should burn modern culture and we should deny our present DNA and whatever. Of course, that has to be transcended properly, and Vedic culture has to be understood properly in the context of Lila. but we are not against, modern culture. If not, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation via Zoom now. So let me just almost conclude by sharing some other words from my Guru Maharaj that I found very compelling to share here. I also shared them in this recent exchange I was telling you about regarding how to deal with culture and that in a dynamic way. So he says like this: not all modern insights are inherently bad. Furthermore, while we are not advocates of modern society, we are in many ways a product of it and inextricably entwined with it. Kali Yuga is epitomized by hypocrisy. Should we refer to ancient Vedic culture with regard to one specific issue and condemn modern society, while at the same time eat the technological fruits of modern society? We are not for destroying the present and returning to what we think was the past. We are for the future, drawn from whatever is valuable from any time and offered by anyone. What is Gaudiya Vaishnavism? What is Krishna consciousness? We need to understand this. It is not an institution of various rules and regulations. It is the spirit of divine love expressing itself with new light. We want new light, not a dredging up of the past in an attempt to do away with the present that we feel we cannot deal with. If the past of the so-called Vedic culture is the thesis and the present modern world is the antithesis, we are interested in a synthesis. We are not interested in tearing down the present, but rather in building the future, building a bridge to the future which can carry all souls across the ocean of material existence. So I think these are very crucial considerations in order to balance all that I have been saying. No? What's the role of Vedic culture? What's the role of so-called Vedic culture, modern culture? We in the midst of all that, and according to our particular stage in sadhana. So we should preserve the spirit of the tradition in the context of Vaisnava etiquette, as we are explaining, as something that it is giving authority to our practice, because it's not just a new age speculated product created by someone, but it's the result, as I said, of the whole Renaissance movement, Mahaprabhu, Bhagavat, a whole renaissance of the old Vedic law, if you will, which is nonetheless a Parouseya, which is revealed by God himself, totally divine. So, and of course, this is not about only following the stuff outwards, outside, but internally. And naturally, that will affect us inside. Srila Maharaj will say once that Krishna is independent, he cannot be confined to one bank of the Ganges or the other, nor he can be imprisoned within the walls of any institution. So Krishna, of course, is there where there is sincere pursuit. And that's what Vaishnava etiquette is all about ultimately. But again, if there is sincere pursuit, also we will be open to know what's pleasing to Krishna. We will follow that accordingly with proper understanding. So in conclusion, just before finishing and asking if you may have any questions, of course, these rules of Vaishnava etiquette that we may officially starting to share, some of them starting from next lecture, they are also something dynamic. And there is certain place for some adapting them according to time, place, and circumstance. But also we will find in these rules, at least most of them, some deep common sense, some deep type of, if you will, universal intuition. Like what I say sometimes, universal intuition, I mean, something that we have never thought about that, but when we hear about that, we feel, oh yes, of course, it should have been like this. It makes total sense, but we have never thought about that by ourselves. So there has to be this type of sensitiveness in understanding these rules. And for example, just one random example, and of course we will see this in detail starting from next class, but Vaishnava etiquette will recommend, do not walk on the shadow of your guru. So one may say that's a weird issue. No. No, I cannot just wise, but the point is try to go to the sensitive side of the equation. If I have affection for someone, a real affection for someone who is not only someone in my life, but the one, that person is everything to me. Even his shadow, her shadow, will be sacred. So on following that sensibility, I won't walk onto that shadow. So you have to understand something that may appear externally as a weird rule is if feel internally with such a affectionate sensibility, if properly understood. But sometimes also we may find some rules in Vaisnava etiquette that we may not find further explanation. For example, it is said that ideally, if you offer dandavat, if you fall like a rod to the floor, to the deity, for example, you should not wear up clothes, no? Kurta, of course, if you are a man or whatever, no? T-shirt, you should be without clothes outside. So one may ask, how scientific is that principle? No? That there may be an offense if you offer dandavat wearing your kurta. And the point is that sometimes also this is, again, this has two sides. Okay, there is some sensibility there is some common sense, some universal intuition, but also there may be some rules that we may not have the more detailed explanation as to why it's like that. And and that's interesting also to accept that sometimes things will be like this. Krishna likes something, and you may not ask why to everything. To everything, at least. I'm not saying that everything will be like this, but to some of those things. Not necessarily every devotional principle will have a, I don't know, scientific background. We have, it is said that we have two sides in our brain. One is logical and the other one is emotional. And we make decisions on the basis of both. No? So of course, some of our decisions are rational, some others are emotional. Some of our actions are rational, some of them are based on emotions. And of course, as my Guru Maharaj always says, between rational and emotional decisions, mostly the emotional side wins, overtakes the whole issue. We may say, yes, I know, but I feel. And here we are speaking about love as a goal, bhava, which is not rational. Again, it's not irrational, it's transrational. But the point is, sometimes we need to put our brain on one side. Yan prayasada naman prayeba, and put our head to the ground. So we are trying, love is not rational. We are trying to follow the path of love. So the point is, do not expect everything to be rational, everything to be perfectly satisfactory to the necessity, the demand of your head. If you love somebody, you will do whatever is pleasing to that person, and you will try to avoid what irritates that person. Again, anukulya sankalpa pratikulya savartana. That will be the rationale behind, in this case, not doing dandavat pranam with kurta. Again, most of the rules in Vaishnava etiquette are mostly common sense and understandable, but you may find some of them which come as the test for us to, well, if Krishna comes and says, I like bananas in this way, there's no point of asking, but why? I need an explanation of why is that. And he will say, because I like that. It's my personal taste. And we are to honor that. So I mentioned this as the last point to give place to that possibility, not only in Vaishnava etiquette, but of course in our daily life as well. And sometimes we stop our head in that point, we put the head to the ground, and we will receive much more knowledge by that than trying to understand and putting everything through the filter of our brain. So some words I want to share with you today about Vedic culture, Vaishnava etiquette, and of course, this was some type of interlude, if you will, between previous class and next one. And next class, I will continue speaking more about how to deal in our relationship with the sadhus, with Sri Guru, and so on. So I don't know if there are any questions. We have some minutes. I will allow you to. There you can, if you want, you can unmute yourself and present any question you may have, or share it via chat in a written form.
Looks like Greg wanted you to that quote that you
Which
had
quote?
spoke the quote. Well, when you were speaking about, I think it was with Guru Maharaj had been talking about to you personally, I guess.
Which quote? The one I read just at the end?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ah, okay. I will copy paste and share in the chat. I took it from one sangha years ago, so I cannot tell you the exact link or something, but I can share this with you, and of course you can look for that in greater detail.
That was really a nice quote.
Yeah. So that's the first part I've shared. And I'm sharing the second one. Okay. There they are. So what else? Any other question or comment, whatever you might like to share, of course.
I would like to ask one question.
Rigupad?
Devyapati Das.
Oh, yeah. Devyapati Das, sorry. Similar voice.
I would like that you give me one short counsel. Most probably you remember from yesterday when Guru Maharaj was replying to my answer regarding these levels of where we are now. So he mentioned Madhurya Kandabini book, like where it is explained everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I watched and I found some translation of it. But as I went through a little bit, I understood that the level of the text is, for my present level of concentration, very high. In a sense, I have no concentration to go into that. So I feel now a little bit awkward in a sense. I got some kind of instruction or some like hint there. Something can be found. So what should I do? Should I do like this Brahmana who took this Bhagavad Gita, but he did not read, but he tries. So should I take Madhurya Kandabini and I start to read it? If I understand, if I have a concentration or whatever, and in this way, to try to satisfy Guru, or this, according to you, is not so crucial that I read this book, but something else. How to think about this reply that I got?
Yeah, and which was the edition that you found? Just to know, I'm curious.
This is interesting. I'm very little bit acquainted with where to look exactly. I typed there, and there was some ISKCON, different books, whatever. I never read some like books other than Srila Prabhupada's books. So yeah. I'm also never exactly sure which one to pick or whatever.
Yeah. Well, actually, I will say that Madhurya Kadambini is a very important book, and it's, strictly speaking, it's a very basic one. Not a very basic, but not the most advanced book, especially regarding the work of its author, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. I will say that's one, if not the most introductory one, book written by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So you can imagine about the other books, their content. But I think it's a nice book, and I think the devotee like you, especially if your Guru Maharaj was given the instruction to read it and to study it, you have the blessings to do so. So those blessings are there to help us reach the meaning of the book. But I understand. I'm not sure. That's why I asked which was the edition, because I think that there are some other editions which could be more easily to understand. So you can also remind me about my private message, and I can share you some PDF of that. But something that comes to my mind, especially regarding how to address Madhurya Kadambini in a comprehensive way, user-friendly way, something that I will strongly recommend to you and to whoever has not yet read the book, is to go through the series of presentations that Dulal Chandra Prabhu has made in YouTube. He has a YouTube channel, and he still is doing that. He published more than 20 or 30, I don't remember. But he's going through all the different parts of the book and following some well-known commentary to that. And he's really presenting in a very nice way in PowerPoint with images and words. And I think that makes it very user-friendly. meanwhile I'm speaking, I think maybe I'm asking if someone could just share, or I may do it, no problem. I will continue speaking to you meanwhile, but I'm sharing, I'm looking for the link, some link in YouTube, so you can enter there, and I think that will be a very, and you are studying the book, no? Because in that book there is, I mean, he's not skipping any section of the book, so that will be a very interesting way of approaching it. So I will recommend strongly. Here I'm sharing with you the link of his channel. I'm sharing publicly, so whoever may like to share. And there you will find those videos of Madhurya Kadambini. Mostly all the videos in that channel are from this series. So I hope that helps. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Maharaj.
Oh, no, thank you. Okay. Some other question before finishing?
Maharaj, it's Kanuram here.
Yeah, I can run.
Jai Maharaj. So you're talking about, it's a little bit off the subject maybe, but you're talking about like in our future, like aspiring to take birth more in a Krishna Lila or in Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. And while that may be some births ahead in the future, should one, like as a sadhaka, should one aspire to develop like the knowledge and skills that would be there? Like for instance, if we hope to like take birth in Lord Chaitanya's pastimes as a Brahmin boy, would it benefit us to like study grammar and logic? Or if we want to take birth in the Goloka, you focus on cow protection, and do those things like apply to us currently? Is that, or should, I realize that bhakti should be our essential focus, but are those things also good? Are those things secondary or beneficial?
Yeah, that's a nice question. Well, I will give it, I will say in great terms, yes and no, in the sense of, for example, I don't know, we hear that certain devotees in the Lila have certain services. Let's say some devotee, let's go to Braja Lila for a minute, where you will find a little bit more of variety of possibilities regarding identity. And I don't know, some gopi will be singing or reciting poetry or whatever, cooking. And we know there are certain preparations that are being made in the Golok. So the point is, it's not that, let's say, okay, I have to learn poetry here and now, because if not, I will go there and I won't know how to rhyme the verses properly and so on. I mean, many of those things will come from their own. And I will say also, we have this intermediate birth, as you know, in the Bhoma Lila Vrindavan. No? So there's also this preparation field according to what's going on in the ultimate Golok Vrindavan. No? So my point is, you can be born, as Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur said, you are born from the womb of the gopi, and from day one you are totally enveloped by this particular culture. And at that time you already have prem. At least that's the rule. Of course, you may be born in just whenever Krishna Lila is going on, and you happen to be born there, and if you will, you are not having prem, that's another case. But my point is, you may have prem, so you have an affinity, strong, clear, established, eternally, etc. But some other details will appear there in the context of the Lila. So maybe, let's say here in this lifetime, you achieve prem, let's give an example. And in the context of prem, of course, prem is something specific. It's not just prem. It's Sakya prem, Madhurya prem, and a specific variety of that. And you will have a spiritual identity developed with spiritual personality and taste and affinities according to Sangha and inspiration. So even though in this lifetime that you achieve prem, let's say, and you project yourself to be a cowherd boy and you want to learn all that it is about, let's say, it's not that necessarily you had to do that in this lifetime. I'm not saying that's wrong at all, but let's say you were, for any reason, you were not able to become an expert in cow herding in this lifetime, but you reach prem. So next lifetime you will be born in the Bhoma Lila, in the womb of a gopi as a gopa, and you will be born in a family of cowherders, in a town of cowherders. So whatever detail was not learned in the previous lifetime, that will be placed there, and that will play itself out for eternity. So, and with this, I'm not saying, so we don't need to concern about that at all. No, that's not like that. It can become also an udipana and a stimulant in our present life of sadhakas, but also we see so many examples in devotees. And there are devotees, as you say, who may learn grammar and Sanskrit and Bengali. And I think that's nice. But again, not everyone will have the time or maybe even the intellectual capacity to learn a language like Sanskrit or Bengali. And that's not disqualifying them from entering the Leela. But for those who have that facility, that may help them in some way. Of course, that may also become an obstacle. You can become proud because you are a pandit. Everything can happen, but if there's the proper approach to that, you can, of course, be learning. I was the other day speaking with one devotee who lives in Vrindavan, who is a pandit, Sanskrit pandit, Bengali pandit, and many other languages pandit. Very, very, very nice devotee. And I was sharing that I was trying to starting because my Guru Maharaj gave the express. It would be nice if you learn Bengali, and I like languages. Of course, I don't have full time to just dedicate myself to that. But I shared with him that, and he said, "Oh, that's nice. If you have that affinity and that instruction, that will help you to build some sense of identity in your projection in the Leela and so on." So he connected my learning of a language with that point. Not just you are learning the language and now you know Bengali, but that if you do that properly, you may get some special feeling for the Nadia Leela in this case. But again, it doesn't mean that if you don't know Bengali, there is no chance for you to do that. So that's why I'm saying it's not like black or white. Everyone should do this or you shouldn't do that at all. It can be there, but even if you, for any reason, you didn't learn whatever, the basics of a language, of cow herding or whatever service, you didn't learn to play the Veena, let's say, but maybe you are born as a Manjari and you will play Veena for Radha and Krishna. You didn't learn to be born in South India and learn Veena in this lifetime or next one. You may be born in Bhoma Lila and with the association of Nitya Siddhas become acquainted of those arts. And of course, that learning will happen in a different dynamics. Now, of course, Krishna learned the 64 arts in 64 days. That's Krishna, yes, for sure. But also, if we have prem and we are born in the Bhoma Lila, of course, learning will also, there's place for learning to happen in a quite magical way, if you will. No, it's not necessarily you have to take the lessons and practice for hours. And we are speaking here in terms of spiritual arts, spiritual service. So the learning will come from, you have already prem, so there's lots of magic there as well. So I will give it open for those possibilities. But again, if someone has that affinity now in this lifetime and feels whatever, one may feel I have affinity for Sakya Rasa and I like cow herding. So I think that may help me. I mean, of course, there's a place for that. You can transform that activity, which is not necessarily bhakti, as we know, although it's mentioned in the bhakti angas, but not necessarily as swarup siddha bhakti. But you can convert that as part of a crucial aspect of your bhakti also. And in eternity, you will be quite engaged in that for sure. So that will be my answer. I hope that may help a little bit.
Yeah, that's very helpful, Maharaj. Thank you. It's not black or white. And
Yeah.
One thing I was thinking, just a quick comment the other day, that like Guru Maharaj says, we go through this lifetime as a sadhaka, and we in our next lifetime, so some of the burdens that we carry now will be left behind with this body. And I guess our next body type, our next psychophysical makeup would be more conducive for being a sadhaka. So that's good.
Yeah, I agree with that fully, of course. So we should be patient, and even if our present psychophysical condition is not the best, I mean, it's a process, gradually everything. It's part of karma. I mean, to have this particular body, this particular mind, is part of our prarabdha karma. So gradually that will take a more upgraded form, if you will, eventually. No? But we have to use that as best as we can, and that will attract so much blessing. So it's okay. Yeah. Okay. So there's one more question by Omkar. So I will address that one, and we may finish with that. He's saying, I want to ask about the use of the word Hindu. Use of this word seems to be a taboo for some, whereas Guru Maharaj uses it a lot. Is it because of context at public? So if I have to answer in a brief way, my answer will be yes. It's a pretty contextual thing, of course. So you, again, as I mentioned before, we have to become Desha Kala Vibhagavit, knowers of the difference between time, place, and circumstance, which means audience. For some person, the word Hindu will be misleading. For other person, it will be clarifying. For other person, it will be enough. For other person, will be too much, too less. So sometimes, this is a thing. Now, sometimes you are walking in the street and people say, "What's your religion?" or "What do you do?" Or they may ask you even, "Is this a religion or a philosophy?" And in my case, before answering them, I start to interrogate them first, because they say, "Is this religion or philosophy?" And I ask them, "Tell me your understanding of what's religion and philosophy first, because if not, I cannot tell you, yes, it's a religion. Who knows what's your idea of religion? Or I tell you, yes, it's a philosophy. I don't know your idea of that. It may be misleading. So first you describe to me your idea of religion, your idea of philosophy, and I will tell you, according to your idea, we are that, we are not that. But yeah, and also generally, most people sometimes just curious, by seeing yourself with these weird clothes in the street, and they just want to satisfy their curiosity on a level. They do not want to learn the details of Gaudiya Vedanta. Because sometimes you may want to be more specific, but the person is not willing to hear that. So you may say, yes, are you Buddhist? And you may say, no. Some in Hindu. No, Hindu sometimes has to do with Hinduism. And of course, Hinduism is still a very generic thing to say because so many things are there. But for some people, it's enough. No, I mean, it's enough. Okay, not Buddhist, of course, not Christian, not this. Okay, you are Hinduist. Thank you so much. See you later, and the person will leave. But of course, if the person wants to know more, you have to go beyond the Hindu term. But again, in general terms, we may present ourselves as that, not because we are born in India, but this is a tradition that is, of course, traditional link with India. But as I mentioned today, it's not India as we know of it now. But again, for explaining all these details for a bypasser in the street, it may be too much. If someone is interested in knowing the details, okay, yes, there's Hinduism, there's whatever, personal, impersonal, theistic, atheistic, so many darshans in India, and what's India, what's not India, and what's personal, and what's bhakti, types of bhakti. Finally, you will reach Raja Bhakti someday after the explanation. But generally, that will take time. Sometimes people tell me in the street, what do you do? Not regarding my practice. What's your practice about? And I just think, where to start? I mean, do you have one lifetime of time for me to explain you in detail? Because I cannot reply to that in 5 minutes. It's so specific, as we say today. But yeah, you have to judge. You may say to someone, I'm a Hindu, look at their face, and if their face is not smiling and being satisfied, you may need to clarify that and find another term. So yeah, we need to become experts in knowing the differences of time, place, circumstance. That's a very big commitment and big task for all of us. So that's part of our service to our Sampradaya with Guru and Vaishnavas. So thank you very much to all of you for your time, questions, attention, presence, and see you next Thursday. We will continue entering more officially with different types of advice, rules, and love in our lives as sadhaka, in this case, in the context of our relationship with sadhus and Guru. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Sriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Sri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Shri Dwadasi ki jai, Gaur Bhaktavind ki jai, Gaur Premananda Hari Om. Vancha kalpatarubhyashta kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namaha.